All right, so for example number 2, we're going to rearrange literal equations, okay? So let's read this. It says using inverse operations, all right, that's important. So I want you to underline that. Inverse operations to rearrange literal equations. You can use inverse operations basically to rearrange any equation. And that could be applied to any formula. So the interest formula, interest is equal to the principal times rate, is another example of a literal equation. The reason they're calling it literal is if you notice there's no numbers there. Each letter or variable represents something. In other words, I represents the interest. P represents the principal or the initial amount. R represents the rate of interest, and T represents the time. Okay, so let's do example number 2A. It says find the number of years. Number of years, what is that? What variable do you think that is? Time. Years is a measurement of time, so that would be the variable T. That's what they want us to find. And then used in a calculation of $1,000 with an interest rate of 5%, with interest totaling $600. So let's figure that out. What amount did they start with? In other words, their principal is equal to $1,000. They started off owing $1,000. Their rate is 5% written as a decimal. Well, 5% is the same as 5 per 100. Grab your handy-dandy calculator and tell me what 5 divided by 100 is as a decimal. It's 0.05. So then my rate is 0.05. And then lastly, they said the total amount of interest, that's the capital I, equals $600. So what they're saying is, they're saying that if I borrow $1,000 from the bank, and I have an interest rate, they charge me interest for 0.05. How long will it take me to pay off this loan? How many years will it take me to pay off this loan if the total interest was $600? And I want you to think about that a little bit. If I borrow $1,000 and I pay back the $1,000 plus the $600 interest, I borrowed $1,000, but I end up paying $1,600. A lot of people don't realize this when you purchase a home. If you buy the house for $100,000 and you go through a 30-year loan through a bank, you almost pay back $250,000 because you're taking 30 years to pay it back. It's crazy. If you buy a car for $20,000, by the time you pay off that car, whether it's 5 or 6 years, you end up paying like $26,000 because you're paying interest every month. Okay, so just think about that. But anyways, what we want to do is we want to solve for T. Now, they wrote out all the steps, but I want you to help me with this. I'm going to write it over to the side. I'd like for you to do the same. Start with the equation. So I'm going to start with I is equal to P times R times T. So remember that if I say AB, that means A times B. So I'll write that out. A times B, or A multiplied by B. This means A multiplied by B, just like this means A multiplied by B. So this is P times R times T. I want to solve for T. I want to get T by itself. So that means I need to move the P and the R away from the T. In order to move the P and the R away from the T, I have to think, what is the P and the R doing to the T? They're multiplying. What's the inverse of multiplying? Dividing. So I'm going to divide this side by P and R because that's all I want to move. Sometimes kids will write down the T. Well, you don't want to move the T, you want to leave the T. So you only write down the things that you want to move. What math operation you do is the inverse of what's originally being done. So I'm going to divide by PR, but remember, whatever I do on one side, I have to do to the other. Remember, this is an I. It looks like a 1. So now, what kind of property is that? That is the property. What kind of property is that if I divided? Yeah, it's the division property of, help me finish this sentence, equality, right? I'm saying the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side, equality. So that's the division property of equality. Whenever I say, whatever I do on one side, I do to the other side, that's a property of equality. Well, what did I do? I divided. So we use the division property of equality to keep the equation balanced. Anyways, what's P divided by P? 1. So P divided by P is the same as 1 over 1. What's R divided by R? 1. So that's the same as 1 over 1. What's 1 times T? Just T. What is 1 times 1 on the bottom? Just 1. What's T over 1? Just T. But on this side, I've got the interest over the principal times the rate. That's where all this stuff comes from. Okay? So now I can find the answer by plugging in my values for I. In other words, this is my value for interest, which I wrote up on the thing, over P times R. Well, we said that P was equal to 1,000. Now I could plug this in the calculator to verify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the calculator and I'm just going to enter it in, okay? So I'm going to hit math, go over to the fraction thing, get my little fraction button. In the top, I'm going to put 600. Or as they say where I grew up, 600. And then I'm going to, on the bottom, say 1,000 times 0.05, right? So I'm just entering in this information into my calculator, basically how I see it. And guess what the answer is? 12. That's what they say here. T equals 12. So what does that mean? How long will it take them to pay off the loan?
12 years.
It'll take him 12 years to pay off the loan. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
It's sir.
I said ma'am.
Oh, well, don't say it that way. It's too